Isabella Whitmore, the beloved only child of William Whitmore, one of New York's most powerful muggles, lived a life of opulence and indulgence. Surrounded by extravagant parties and luxury vacations, Isabella was used to getting her way. Her reckless behavior and sense of entitlement had long been a source of concern for her father, who had tried everything to instill a sense of value in her, but to no avail. Determined to teach her a final drastic lesson, William devised a bold plan. He summoned Isabella to his office one morning. As she entered, her eyes narrowed with curiosity at the seriousness on her father's face. "Isabella," William began, his tone unyielding, "if you want any share of my business or inheritance, there's one condition you must accept." "Condition?" Isabella scoffed, a mocking smile on her lips. "Dad, you know I'm not going to agree to anything that involves giving up what's rightfully mine." But William was unfazed. "You will only inherit the family fortune if you agree to marry Jacob Miller, a farmer in Texas." Isabella's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she burst into laughter. "A farmer? You can't be serious. Me married to someone like that? Dad, I've endured all your attempts to teach me lessons, but this is crossing the line." "I'm not joking, Isabella," her father replied, his voice steady. "Either you marry him and live on his farm for a year, or you lose everything." Rage and disbelief swept over her. "You really do this to your own daughter?" "If that's what it takes to teach you the value of life beyond wealth, yes." Taking a deep breath, he added, "Jacob is an honest, hard-working man. He can show you a world you've never known." That night, Isabella wrestled with her thoughts. The idea of losing her inheritance had never crossed her mind, not even in her worst nightmares. But marrying a farmer? It was nearly unimaginable. Yet reluctantly, she agreed. Their first meeting was far from ideal. When Jacob arrived at the Whitmore mansion, Isabella sat with her chin raised, her expression cold. She was clearly displeased at having to meet someone she considered beneath her. As the farmer walked in, she scrutinized him from head to toe, the worn hat, the dirt-streaked boots, the plain clothes. "So, you're the famous Jacob Miller?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I expected nothing less from a farmer." Jacob, calm and composed, looked her straight in the eye. "And you must be the infamous Isabella Whitmore, the spoiled heiress of New York." She let out a sarcastic laugh. "You don't waste any time, do you? You're probably eager to get your hands on my father's money." Jacob crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Money is the reason I'm here, yes, but not for the reasons you think. Your father made a deal to support my community. I'm here for them, not for you." Isabella rolled her eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Do you really think I'm going to spend a year on some dusty farm with you?" "That's up to you," he replied coolly, "but if you stay under my roof, you'll have to live by my rules." "Rules?" she scoffed, leaning forward with a sneer. "I didn't come here to play farmer, much less to take orders from someone like you." Jacob stepped closer, his expression hardening. "Then maybe you should think twice before speaking, because I didn't ask to be here either, and certainly not to marry someone who only values what glitters." Their tense standoff was interrupted by William, who had been silently observing the exchange. "You two better learn to get along," he interjected firmly. "This wedding will take place in 1 week." Isabella remained quiet, fury simmering in her eyes. But deep down, she knew there was no way out. A week later, Isabella and Jacob were married in a ceremony that left Isabella feeling both stunned and insulted by its stark simplicity. There were no guests, no classical music, just the two of them and a justice of the peace. Wearing a plain white dress, Isabella struggled to conceal her displeasure, while Jacob appeared calm and indifferent, as if he was simply fulfilling a duty. When the judge asked if they would exchange rings, Jacob turned to Isabella with a serious expression. "I think we don't need any more symbols than what we already have here, do we?" Isabella snorted and looked away. "No, we certainly don't." Immediately after the wedding, they made their way to Jacob's farm. The entire journey was steeped in tense silence. Upon arrival, Isabella stepped out of the car, her eyes widening at the sight of the simple wooden house surrounded by dusty fields and grazing animals. This was a world away from the bustling luxury of New York. She let out an exasperated sigh, her gaze filled with disdain. "So, this is where you live?" she asked, her tone dripping with contempt. Yes, and now you do too, he replied, placing her suitcase on the ground beside her. Don't treat me like I belong here, Isabella muttered under her breath. Jacob chuckled. If you keep that attitude, it's going to be a tough year for you, but that's not my problem. That first night brought an even greater shock. After settling into the Spartan bedroom, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Isabella, we get up at 6:00 a.m. around here. There's work to be done, Jacob said, his voice firm. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Get up at 6? Jacob, I'm not going to subject myself to farm chores. I'm a Whitmore. I don't do manual labor. Jacob's expression didn't change. Here, the name Whitmore means nothing. Either you help out or you're out. It's your choice, but I doubt you want to face the consequences. Without another word, Jacob left the room, leaving Isabella to stew in her frustration and confusion. For the first time in her life, she felt truly powerless. The wealth and status she once wielded so confidently meant nothing in this place. The next morning, Isabella was jolted awake by a firm knock on her door. Groggily opening her eyes, she saw Jacob standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. Get up, Isabella. It's already past 6, he said firmly. She groaned, turning over. Jacob, this can't be real. I don't get up before 8, and certainly not for manual labor. Jacob's expression remained steely. You're on the farm now, Isabella. Here, everyone pulls their weight. If you don't start cooperating, this year is going to feel even longer. With an irritated sigh, she begrudgingly threw off the covers and dressed in the simplest clothes she could find. Stepping outside, she was greeted by the fresh morning air mixed with the earthy scent of the fields. Jacob stood waiting, a faint smile on his face as he saw her approach. Ready to start? He asked, as if he truly believed she might be. Let's get one thing straight, Jacob, she said, crossing her arms defiantly. I'm only here because of my father's condition. Don't expect me to do anything beyond the bare minimum. Jacob nodded calmly. I don't expect anything else. But here, the bare minimum still means real work. Now come on, I'll show you the stable. Reluctantly, Isabella followed him, careful not to get her shoes muddy. The stable was a simple weathered structure where horses and cows rested in makeshift stalls. Jacob handed her a shovel and a bucket, explaining that her first task was to clean up. Clean? Isabella repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. You actually expect me to do this? Yes, Jacob replied evenly. There's no one else here to do it for you. Everyone contributes. With visible disgust, Isabella took the shovel, staring at the dirty floor covered in straw and manure. After a few minutes of half-heartedly pushing the hay around, it was clear she was doing as little as possible. Jacob, watching from a distance, could easily see through her feigned efforts. You might want to put in a bit more effort if you plan to finish before sundown, he remarked with a hint of amusement. She shot him a glare, her breath quickening in frustration. I wasn't born for this, Jacob. This kind of work isn't for someone like me. Jacob shook his head, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. You talk like it's some kind of royal privilege. But here, Isabella, no one's better than anyone else. Over the next few days, the tension between them only grew. Isabella tried every trick to avoid the work, feigning illness, inventing excuses, but Jacob saw through her every time. One afternoon, when he found her lounging under a tree to dodge her chores, he approached and stood over her. Comfortable? He asked, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. Much more comfortable than in that filthy stable, she shot back, irritation clear in her voice. Jacob let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. You still don't get it, Isabella. Out here, nobody's playing games. If you really want to settle in, you might want to rethink your attitude. Why do you even care? She retorted. Weren't you forced into this marriage too? His gaze hardened, his voice lowering. I'm not doing this for myself. I do it for the community, for the people who rely on what we grow here. This is the real world, Isabella. For once, she was at a loss for words. In the days that followed, she began to notice how differently Jacob and the farmhands approached their work. While she begrudgingly did the bare minimum, they threw themselves into their tasks with genuine effort. She watched Tom, one of the farmhands, cheerfully hefting sacks of grain while telling stories, as if his life held no troubles. One morning, driven by a curiosity she didn't quite understand, she asked him, Tom, How do you keep doing this every single day without complaining?" Tom's eyes crinkled with a smile. "Well, Miss Isabella, when you find value in what you do, the work just becomes another part of the day. Everyone here knows they're contributing to something bigger." She frowned, confused. "I don't get it. You live with so little, yet you all seem happy." Tom shrugged. "Money ain't everything, miss. Sometimes having peace of mind is worth a whole lot more." That conversation gnawed at her. Lying in bed that night, on the hard mattress she still hated, she replayed Tom's words over and over. These people lived with almost nothing, yet seemed to have a satisfaction she had never known. Still, her pride held her back from admitting any of it. The next day, she confronted Jacob again. "Look, Jacob, I still think this entire lifestyle is pointless. Living this way makes no sense to me." Jacob gave another indifferent shrug. "That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. No one can teach you to value things if you refuse to see them." What she didn't realize was that the seeds of change had already been planted. Every interaction, every word spoken by those around her, was slowly chipping away at her rigid beliefs. But change would not come easily. It was just the beginning of a long journey. The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. Farm life was grueling, uncomfortable, and exhausting. Each morning, Jacob woke her up at precisely 6 a.m., and every new task only deepened her frustration. She missed the luxuries she had taken for granted. Her first job of the day was always the same, cleaning the stable. And every day, she found a way to delay it. One morning, leaning heavily on the shovel, she sighed, her eyes flickering to where Jacob watched her from a distance. "Still haven't figured out the importance of doing a job right, have you?" he remarked, approaching her. "I don't need another lecture, Jacob," she snapped, glaring at him. "I'm only here because I was forced to be. Don't expect me to pretend this is worthwhile," he smirked. "Funny. I don't see anything unworthy about taking care of the animals that feed this community. But maybe you just need more time to understand." Isabella rolled her eyes. "This whole idea of community welfare is dull and pointless. It all feels like a punishment." "Punishment?" Jacob let out a laugh, shaking his head. "This is just life for most people. Maybe it's time you realized that." "Isabella, don't expect them to pity someone who's always had everything handed to them," Jacob said, his words cutting through her defenses. His remark stung, and anger surged within her, but she managed to bite back a retort. However, as the days passed, something began to shift. Without even realizing it, Isabella found herself resisting the tasks a little less. Conversations with Tom, Ruth, and the other farm workers slowly opened her eyes to the genuine pride they took in their simple, yet purposeful lives. One evening, as she helped Jacob organize supplies in the barn, a question that had been lingering in her mind finally slipped out. "Why did you agree to marry me?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant, though her curiosity was genuine. Jacob paused, taken aback by her question. "Your father offered support for my community. I accepted because I knew it would make a difference for them. So, that's all," she pressed, clearly expecting a deeper answer. Jacob let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Yes, what else did you think it was?" She shrugged, struggling to hide her embarrassment. "I don't know. Maybe I thought you had a personal reason. It's one thing to accept my father's proposal, but agreeing to live with me is another." Jacob stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers with a steady, unyielding gaze. "I did it for my people, Isabella. But that doesn't mean I'm enjoying this arrangement. You needed a reality check. A place to understand the value of hard work. I'm just here to facilitate that." A heavy silence hung between them. For the first time, Isabella felt a pang of guilt. As much as she resented being here, she realized that Jacob was also making sacrifices. In a strange way, it made her question everything she thought she knew. But old habits die hard. One morning, she flat out refused to leave her bed, determined to ignore the start of another grueling day. Jacob, however, wasn't about to let her get away with it. He marched into her room, yanked the door open, and pulled the covers right off her. "Do you honestly think you can spend a year here hiding under blankets?" he asked, his voice firm. "I wasn't born to do this kind of work," Isabella shut back, sitting up, her frustration evident. Jacob exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. "And I wasn't born to babysit a spoiled princess, but here we are, so let's both deal with it." She glared at him, her defiance flaring up. "This is absurd. I don't have to take orders from someone like you." Jacob shrugged, turning to leave. "Maybe it's time you figured out what you really want, but while you're on this farm, you follow my rules." The days that followed were filled with constant back and forth bickering. Isabella felt increasingly exposed by Jacob's blunt responses. He always seemed to see through her attempts to provoke him. Yet she continued to resist fully embracing her responsibilities, even as her evasions grew more subtle. One afternoon, during a quiet lunch, Isabella found herself sitting beside Ruth, the elderly neighbor who often came to lend a hand on the farm. There was something about Ruth's calm demeanor that drew Isabella in, even though she couldn't understand it. "Ruth," she began tentatively as they shared a simple meal of salad and homemade bread, "how can you stay so positive with such a modest life?" Ruth's eyes twinkled as she smiled warmly. "Oh, my dear, life isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. Over the years, I've learned to appreciate the small things I've built with my own hands. Happiness isn't about piling up possessions. It's about the joy you create and the love you share." Isabella was taken aback, left speechless by Ruth's words. As she lay in bed that night, her thoughts swirled. For the first time, she began to wonder if perhaps she had been searching for happiness in all the wrong places. "It's about what you give," Ruth said softly. Isabella frowned, trying to wrap her mind around the concept. "But haven't you ever wanted more?" "Of course I have," Ruth admitted. "But I learned that chasing more only brings anxiety and takes away your peace. What truly brought me joy was learning to appreciate the present moment and the people around me." Ruth's words echoed in Isabella's mind long after their conversation. She found herself reflecting on them, questioning what really mattered. Yet her pride kept her holding on to the same defiant attitude. That evening, as she sat at dinner with Jacob, a question she'd been too stubborn to ask before finally slipped out. "Have you always been content living like this?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine curiosity, though she tried to keep it casual. Jacob paused, setting down his fork, clearly surprised by her question. "Yes, always, and honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way." "But don't you ever miss something bigger?" she pressed, not realizing she was letting her guard down. A rare, genuine smile crept onto Jacob's face. "Bigger? I see greatness right here. The people who pour their hearts into their work, who live as part of a community, there's nothing greater than that." Isabella rolled her eyes, trying to hide her confusion. "That's a nice sentiment, but I still think it's a narrow way to live." Jacob chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe to you, but for me, it's more than enough." As the days passed, Isabella began to change, almost without noticing it herself. She started helping with dinner, cleaning areas of the farm without being asked, and even chatting with the workers. One afternoon, she took on the task of feeding the chickens, something simple, yet it brought an unexpected smile to her face. Jacob watched her transformation with cautious curiosity. Though traces of her pride still showed, he could see a subtle shift. The constant bickering between them became less frequent, though they still clashed on some days. One morning, as they milked the cows, Isabella sighed heavily. "This work never ends. How do you manage it?" "Because every bit of effort means something," Jacob replied patiently. "When you put your heart into something, you see the results in the end. That's what keeps you going." She didn't respond but found herself mulling over his words. Deep down, she was beginning to understand, though admitting it was still too hard. That evening, after another long day, they sat together on the porch in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time, Isabella felt a kind of peace she had never known. There were no loud parties, no endless obligations, just the stillness of the countryside. "I never knew it could be so peaceful," she whispered, almost to herself. Jacob glanced at her, his voice softer now. "Sometimes what really matters is right in front of us, but we're too busy chasing other things to notice." For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Isabella felt a strange, unspoken connection. She couldn't quite place it, but she sensed something shifting inside her. Yet she had no idea that her journey was far from over, with more challenges and discoveries waiting ahead. As weeks turned into months, Isabella found herself slowly adapting to the grueling farm routine, even though the environment still felt foreign and uncomfortable. She complained less, resisted the tasks less, but her relationship with Jacob remained strained. They were like two strangers under the same roof, never fully bridging the gap between them. One morning, Isabella struggled to drag a heavy bale of hay, her frustration mounting with each futile tug. Sweat trickled down her forehead as she fought with the weight. Jacob approached, watching her with a hint of amusement. "Still haven't figured out how to handle that, have you?" he teased, a smirk playing on his lips. "I don't need your help, Jacob," she snapped, her patience wearing thin. "I'm not here to help," he replied, his tone calm but edged with irony. "I'm just curious how someone so stubborn manages to resist adapting." Letting go of the bale, Isabella turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You know, Jacob, I really don't understand why you're so intent on making me go through this. I could be anywhere else right now, living a different life." Jacob's smile faded as he met her gaze. "Maybe that's the problem, Isabella. You keep thinking about where else you could be instead of making the most of where you are." His words hung in the air, leaving Isabella with a lingering sense of confusion and something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just frustration, it was the faint realization that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to life than what she'd always believed. "Anywhere but here," Isabella muttered bitterly, her voice edged with frustration. "Dealing with this primitive work is beneath me." Jacob folded his arms, his gaze steady. "Have you ever considered that maybe that's exactly why your father sent you here? So that you could finally understand the value of things." "The value of things," she echoed with a scoff, rolling her eyes. "That's the most cliché nonsense I've ever heard. You might find it charming, but I'm meant for bigger things than feeding chickens and shoveling manure." Jacob was quiet for a moment, then he leaned forward, his eyes unwavering. "Then prove it." "Prove what?" she asked, caught off guard. "Prove that you're truly capable of those bigger things," he replied. "But start here. If you can't see value in the little things right in front of you, how will you ever find it elsewhere?" His words struck a chord in Isabella that she wasn't ready to acknowledge. They lingered, echoing in her mind even as she tried to dismiss them. Her pride kept her defensive, yet a small voice inside her wondered if there was truth to what Jacob had said. As days turned into weeks, Isabella noticed the ease with which Jacob and the farm workers laughed together, exchanging stories as they worked. One afternoon, she found herself drawn to their circle, listening to their simple tales. Ruth, noticing Isabella's quiet presence, smiled warmly. "Miss Isabella, why don't you tell us a story about the city? I bet you have some fascinating tales from New York." Isabella hesitated but eventually decided to share a memory of one of the extravagant galas she had attended. As she described the opulent decorations, the live orchestra, and the sparkling lights, she realized that, instead of awe, her listeners looked intrigued, almost as if she were describing a distant alien world. "And did that really make you happy?" Ruth asked gently, her expression thoughtful. Isabella faltered, momentarily at a loss for words. For the first time, she couldn't answer with her usual confidence. That simple question planted a seed of doubt in her mind, one she couldn't easily shake off. That evening, still unsettled by Ruth's question, Isabella confronted Jacob. "Do you think my life doesn't make me happy?" she demanded, her eyes reflecting both anger and uncertainty. Jacob met her gaze calmly. "I don't claim to know what makes you happy, Isabella. But have you ever asked yourself if those luxuries you're so proud of truly mean anything to you?" She crossed her arms defensively. "I like my life just fine, Jacob. I don't need you or anyone else," questioning it. Jacob simply shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe, but someday you might realize that happiness isn't something you can buy." Annoyed, Isabella turned on her heel and stomped away. Yet his words gnawed at her, quietly persistent. She couldn't deny that, despite the glitz and glamour of New York, something had always felt hollow. But her pride was a fortress she wasn't ready to breach. For days, she avoided Jacob, attempting to prove to herself that she could remain detached even here. But her resolve wavered when, one afternoon, she stumbled upon a calf trapped in the fence. The poor creature was terrified, and Isabella's first instinct was to call for Jacob. But this time she hesitated. Instead, she took a deep breath and decided to handle it herself. After a few moments of struggling with the fence, she finally freed the calf. It bolted into the field, and for a brief, unexpected moment, Isabella felt a flicker of pride in her accomplishment. Jacob, who had been watching from a distance, approached with a look of approval. Looks like you're more capable than you thought, he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. Don't make a big deal out of it, Isabella retorted, but there was no bite in her tone. It was just a small thing. Jacob shook his head slowly. Sometimes the small things matter the most. Isabella turned away, trying to hide the satisfaction she felt. Deep down, she knew he was right, but admitting it was still a battle she wasn't ready to face. That night, as she lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in her mind. For the first time, the farm didn't feel quite so foreign. A subtle shift had begun within her, a change she couldn't quite define, but one she could no longer ignore. For the first time, Isabella started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand this world. The relationship between Isabella and Jacob began to shift in subtle ways. While they still exchanged sharp words occasionally, there was something different now. A quiet curiosity that seemed to draw them closer. One evening over dinner, Isabella opened up in a way she never had before. I grew up in a family where everything was about money and status, she admitted, not fully aware of how vulnerable she was being. I used to think life was about success and recognition, but now I'm not sure if anyone really cared about me beyond what I could offer. Jacob listened intently, his gaze softening as he watched her. Maybe that's something you need to learn, Isabella, he said gently. Money can buy you a lot, but never the things that truly matter. She fell silent, letting his words sink in. For the first time, she began to reflect on everything she had been experiencing on the farm. Her usual resistance was beginning to fade, replaced by a realization that there was something genuinely fulfilling in this simpler life. The next morning, determined to start fresh, Isabella woke up before Jacob. For the first time, she decided to take the initiative. She prepared breakfast and even set out a bowl of cereal for him, something that would have been unthinkable to her just a few months ago. When Jacob walked into the kitchen, he stopped in his tracks, clearly surprised. Well, looks like someone woke up in a good mood, he remarked, accepting the bowl with a grateful smile. She laughed softly, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. It's nothing special. I just thought you might appreciate it. He looked at her closely, and for a fleeting moment, there was something in his eyes, an unexpected warmth. It wasn't just gratitude, it was an unspoken acknowledgement of the changes she was undergoing. Day by day, as they continued working together, the atmosphere between them became lighter, more natural. Even the farm workers noticed the shift, with Ruth smiling knowingly whenever she saw Isabella's softened demeanor. One afternoon, as they strolled together towards the fields, Jacob paused and turned to her with a sincere smile. You know, Isabella, I never thought I'd say this, but I think you're doing well. She couldn't help but laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. I can't believe I'm hearing that from you. Jacob nodded, his smile unwavering. Sometimes people just need time to figure out what they're truly capable of. For the first time, Isabella felt like she had found something she had been searching for all her life, a sense of belonging. Here, surrounded by simplicity, she was starting to uncover parts of herself she never knew existed. As the months slipped by, Isabella's connection to the farm and its people deepened. The life she once found unbearable began to bring her small, unexpected joys. The earthy scent after a rainstorm, the genuine smiles of the workers, the way the setting sun cast golden light over the fields. And Jacob, in turn, began to see her in a new light, recognizing the strength hidden beneath her once shallow exterior. One day, while they worked side by side, repairing a fence, Isabella broke the companionable silence. Jacob, she said, her voice hesitant, have you ever imagined a life beyond this farm? I know it's your world, but have you ever thought about leaving, exploring other places? Jacob paused, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and thoughtfulness. I have, once or twice, he admitted, his tone softer than she expected. But there's something about this place, something that keeps me grounded. What about you, Isabella? Have you found what you were looking for out there? She didn't answer right away. For the first time, she realized she wasn't entirely sure anymore. He stared at her, taken aback by her question. No, Isabella, I never really wanted a different life. I'm not like you, who always had the world at your feet. But maybe if things had turned out differently, I might have considered something else. She paused, letting his words sink in. I always thought happiness came from having control over everything, she confessed. But here, I've learned that sometimes you just have to let go and let things happen. Jacob smiled gently, nodding. That's true. Happiness doesn't require much. It's more about appreciating what you already have. Isabella absorbed his words, feeling their weight linger. The more time she spent on the farm, the more she uncovered unexpected challenges and hidden lessons. Each day seemed to peel back another layer of her old life, revealing something new. One morning, as Isabella was helping Ruth with kitchen chores, a tall man arrived at the farm. His familiar features and broad smile instantly caught Isabella's attention. Jacob noticed him from afar, put down his tools, and grinned. "Will, it's been a long time, my friend," Jacob called, clasping the man's hand in a firm handshake. Will was an old friend who had left the small town years ago to explore the world. His return brought a fresh, vibrant energy to the farm. Isabella watched, intrigued, noticing how much more relaxed and lively Jacob became around his old companion. "So, you're Isabella," Will said, eyeing her with a curious smile. "I've heard quite a bit about you." She smiled back, a bit shyly. "I hope it was all good." Will chuckled. "Well, seeing the farm in this state, I can tell Jacob's influence has been rubbing off on you." Isabella's cheeks warmed, and she found herself glancing at Jacob, who quickly looked away. Will's presence added a light-hearted atmosphere to the farm, but as time went on, Isabella began to notice something deeper. While Will and Jacob's friendship was genuine, Will couldn't hide his critical view of the simple life Jacob had chosen, a perspective that reminded Isabella of her former self. "Jacob, you're capable of so much more," Will remarked one evening as they sipped beers on the porch. "Staying tied to this farm, it's limiting you." Listening from a distance, Isabella couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Though Will had his reasons, she felt his words undermined all that Jacob had built. On a sudden impulse, she joined the conversation. "Actually, Will," she interjected, "some of the greatest achievements happen right here in the small, everyday moments. Not everything that matters has to shine under city lights." Jacob turned to her, clearly surprised and maybe even a bit proud. Will, however, laughed, almost as if he hadn't expected her challenge. "Well, Isabella, it seems you've truly adapted," he said, raising his bottle in a toast to her. But then, one afternoon, as Isabella was feeding the animals, her phone rang with an unexpected call. It was an old friend from New York, practically begging for her help with a gala event. His voice was filled with urgency. "Isabella, you're the best at this. We need someone like you to save the event. It's a complete mess," he pleaded. She hesitated, the invitation pulling her back to a world she once knew so well. The glitz, the glamour, the social whirl, it was all so familiar. For a moment, she felt a rush of temptation to return to that life. "I don't know, James," she replied slowly. "A lot has changed for me here." "Come on, Isabella," he insisted with a light laugh. "It's just one event. You can go back to your little countryside adventure afterward. New York will always be your place." After hanging up, Isabella remained seated, clutching the phone. The invitation brought all her old desires rushing back, making her question everything she had discovered on the farm. Was she truly content here, or was she still searching for something more? Instead of mentioning anything to Jacob, Isabella kept her thoughts to herself, letting the day pass in heavy silence. That evening, as they sat quietly on the porch, Jacob noticed her distant expression. "Something bothering you?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on the starry sky above. Isabella hesitated, unsure of how to begin. "I got a call from an old friend," she finally said. "They want me to come back to New York to help organize an event." Jacob's expression remained unreadable as he looked at her. "And what are you thinking?" "I don't know," she confessed. "Going back feels like turning my back on everything I've discovered here. But that life, it's all I've ever known. I feel torn between two worlds." Jacob sighed, his gaze softening as he studied her face. "Isabella, you don't need anyone's permission to decide who you want to be. If you feel like you should go, then go. But just be aware, what you find there might not be the same as it was before." His words lingered in her mind long after. Deep down, she realized he was right. New York still called to her, but now it felt more like a nostalgic echo than the home it once was. As the days passed, Isabella chose not to return to New York, a decision that, for her, was like shedding the weight of her past. She remained on the farm, immersing herself in the simple routines that now felt oddly comforting. Her relationship with Jacob grew deeper. They would talk for hours, sharing laughter over small things, creating moments of warmth she never imagined possible. One clear night, as they sat by the fire, Jacob broke a silence that had been hanging between them for weeks. "Isabella," he began, his voice low, eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I know you believe I married you just because of your father's arrangement, but that's not the whole truth." She turned to him, curiosity brightening her eyes. "What do you mean?" Jacob drew a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "When your father came to me with a proposal, I thought it was absurd. Marrying someone like you, it was unthinkable. But as time passed, I realized there was more to it. I wanted to show you that life doesn't need money or luxury to be meaningful. And I wanted to get to know you." Isabella's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing. "And now, after all this, what do you think?" she asked softly, almost afraid of his answer. Jacob paused, carefully choosing his words. "I was wrong. I thought this would be temporary, but now I see you're so much more than I ever expected, much more." His quiet confession left Isabella shaken. Everything between them, the arguments, the shared work, the teasing banter, suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Amid the challenges and culture shock, they had transformed each other in ways neither could have imagined. In the stillness that followed, they exchanged glances that spoke louder than words. Isabella was torn between the remnants of her old pride and a newfound connection growing deep inside her. As the fire's glow cast soft shadows around them, she finally voiced what she had been holding back. "Jacob, I never thought I could find anything here that truly mattered to me," she said, her voice trembling. "But now I realize it's become a part of who I am." The air between them was heavy with unspoken emotions, but it was a silence rich with understanding. From that moment on, they both knew their relationship had evolved into something far beyond a mere contract. In different ways, they began to see the true value of what they had found in each other. As the weeks turned into months, their bond strengthened. What had once been a reluctant arrangement marked by resistance had blossomed into something natural, something real, something they both, perhaps, had been searching for all along. Isabella had grown more comfortable on the farm than she ever thought possible. The simplicity of rural life brought her a kind of peace she had never known in New York, but, as with all things, tranquility was fleeting. One afternoon, as she and Jacob finished mending a fence damaged by a recent storm, a sleek, black car rumbled up the dusty road, coming to a stop in front of the farmhouse. Isabella's heart sank as soon as she recognized it. It was her father's car. The door opened and William stepped out, his face set in a hard, calculating expression. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that seemed jarringly out of place against the rustic backdrop, he made no effort to hide his disapproval as he took in the sight of his daughter in worn work clothes, her hands stained from labor. "Isabella," he called, his tone cold, "we need to talk." She glanced at Jacob, who gave her a small, understanding nod, as if to say this was a conversation she needed to handle alone. Without a word, William gestured for her to follow him to the porch, away from prying ears. Crossing her arms defensively, Isabella faced him. "What are you doing here, Dad?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I came to see what this place has done to you," William replied, his gaze sweeping the farm with disdain. "And from the looks of it, my fears have been confirmed." She frowned, confused. "What fears?" "I sent you here to learn the value of real things, not to turn into someone unrecognizable," he said sharply. "You're a Whitmore, Isabella. You have obligations to uphold. This farm charade has gone on long enough." "Farm charade?" She shot back, indignation rising in her voice. "I thought you sent me here to change, and that's exactly what I've been doing." William let out an impatient sigh. "Don't be naive. I wanted you to gain some humility, not abandon your responsibilities. Our family's reputation is at stake, and I have plans for your future." "Plans?" she repeated, crossing her arms more tightly. "What could be more important than what I found here?" Meeting her gaze with a steely resolve, he said, "There's a merger in the works with another corporation. For that to happen, I need you to step into your role as heir. And yes, that includes marrying someone who is worthy of the Whitmore name." Isabella's eyes widened in shock and anger. "So you want me to marry a stranger just to secure your business interests?" William's expression didn't falter. "This is the reality we live in, Isabella. You know it as well as I do." The question now is whether you're still capable of living up to the Whitmore legacy, or if you've already thrown it all away for this rustic fantasy. She turned away, frustration boiling inside her. Maybe you never bothered to understand who I really am, Dad. Here, I found something I never had with you, peace. And that's something your money can't buy. William's eyes narrowed, his voice tinged with irritation. Peace? You think peace is more valuable than our family's legacy? You really believe that living among dirt and animals is the future I envisioned for you? They had reached a breaking point, and Isabella knew there was no turning back. If you want to know the truth, she said, her voice trembling, yes, I found peace here. It's something I could never find by your side. William's jaw clenched as he took a deep breath, his disappointment clear. If that's your choice, then perhaps it's time I reconsidered your place in the family. You're out of the will, Isabella, if you choose this life with that farmer. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and final. Isabella felt the weight of the choice before her: return to New York with all its luxuries and security, or stay here on the farm with Jacob and the simple, authentic life she had come to cherish. That evening, as the sun set over the fields, she sat beside Jacob on the porch and shared the conversation she had with her father. Jacob listened quietly, his face showing a mix of understanding and concern. So he expects you to go back to New York and fall in line with his plans? Jacob asked, his voice carefully measured. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible, laden with doubt. Isabella sighed deeply. He's threatening to cut me off if I don't go back and fulfill what he calls my family duty. And, deep down, I know this choice could mean losing everything I have here, including you. Jacob remained silent for a moment, his gaze lost in the darkness beyond the fields. Finally, he turned to her, taking a deep breath. Isabella, he began softly, if you decide to return, I won't stand in your way. I understand how difficult this decision is for you. She looked at him, surprised by his response. Jacob, do you really believe I could just leave you like that? I don't think it would be easy for you, he replied, his voice calm but resolute. But I'd also know it's a choice only you can make. No matter how I feel, what truly matters is where your heart wants to be. She reached for his hand, feeling a surge of emotion. Jacob, before I came here, I had never met anyone like you, someone who values things so genuinely. Everything I've learned, you've been a part of that. He met her gaze with an intensity that made her heart race. Isabella, more than anything, I just want you to be happy, whatever that means for us. For a long time, they had both danced around these feelings, but in that moment, everything became clear. The decision was hers alone, yet the bond, the love, and the transformation they had shared were now undeniable. The following morning, Isabella awoke with a sense of clarity she had never felt before. She dressed quickly and headed out to the fields, where she found Jacob tending to the animals. He looked up curious as she approached with a determined expression. Jacob, she said firmly, I've made my decision. He paused, waiting for her to continue. I choose to stay, she said, her voice steady. My father may have given me the world, but you've given me something I never had, a true home. Relief washed over Jacob's face as he let out a deep breath, a smile slowly forming. He reached out his hand, and she took it, feeling an overwhelming sense of belonging for the first time. But before they could savor the moment, a panicked shout broke the silence. One of the farm workers came running toward them, breathless. Jacob, Isabella, there's a fire in the barn. Their eyes widened in shock, and without hesitation, they sprinted toward the barn. Flames were already licking at the wooden beams, threatening the animals and precious crops stored inside. Jacob, with no regard for his own safety, rushed into the inferno to free the terrified animals, while Isabella, driven by sheer willpower, helped to salvage whatever she could. The fire spread rapidly, illuminating the night sky as farm workers scrambled to contain it. Isabella, her hands blackened with soot and her eyes stinging with tears, worked relentlessly to lead the animals to safety. Her determination, fierce and unwavering, stunned everyone around her. When Jacob emerged from the smoke, carrying the last of the animals, he was coughing and covered in ash. Without a second thought, Isabella ran to him, embracing him tightly. Once the fire was finally under control, the barn lay in ruins. The farm was in disarray, but the animals were safe. That night, exhausted, Isabella and Jacob sat on the porch, their silence heavy with all they had endured. "Now I understand, Jacob," she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "I finally see the value in all of this, in fighting for something that truly matters." Jacob wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "You've always had that strength inside you, Isabella. You just needed a reason to discover it." As they sat there, gazing at the star-filled sky, Isabella's choice became clearer than ever. She had chosen not just the farm and Jacob, but a life filled with purpose and meaning. In the aftermath of the fire, as the reality of farm life became even more apparent, Isabella knew there would be many challenges ahead. But this time she was ready to face them, side by side with Jacob. She had come to realize that every structure, every animal, every inch of land represented not just hard work, but the collective effort of an entire community, and especially Jacob's unwavering dedication. He had poured his heart into creating something meaningful, something lasting. Though the losses from the fire were significant, Jacob and the farm workers didn't waste a moment. By dawn, they were already gathered, discussing plans for reconstruction. Isabella, too, was fully committed. Gone was her previous reluctance toward farm work. Now she was the first to volunteer, organizing materials, clearing debris, coordinating tasks. The decision to stay, to abandon her former life, felt more certain with each passing day, even as new challenges emerged. Jacob watched this transformation with a mix of admiration and quiet pride. During a break, he approached her as she sorted through a pile of wood, separating what could be salvaged. "Isabella," he said softly. She turned, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I never imagined I'd see you like this, so determined," he admitted, a hint of wonder in his voice. She smiled, a smile rich with newfound meaning. "Well, you always told me I needed to understand the value of simple things. I guess I'm finally getting it." He nodded, and for a moment, they simply held each other's gaze. The bond between them had grown into something beyond words, a quiet understanding, a trust that deepened every day. That evening, after a long day's work, they sat together on the porch, where the cool night air and the glow of the moonlight seemed to wash away the fatigue. "Jacob, I've been thinking," Isabella said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The fire was a huge loss, but maybe it's also an opportunity to rebuild, better than before. What if we use this chance to expand, to make the farm even more impactful?" He turned to her, intrigued by the determination in her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "Well," she began, her eyes sparkling, "there are so many people in this community who depend on the farm. What if we expanded the production area or created something that could benefit everyone?" Jacob listened, taken aback by her enthusiasm. Isabella wasn't just accepting her place on the farm, she was embracing it with a passion he hadn't anticipated. "You really want to help make this happen, don't you?" he asked, a trace of awe in his voice. She nodded firmly. "Yes. If I'm going to stay, I want to contribute to something meaningful. I want everyone to feel the same pride you do when you look at this land." A few days later, Ruth, the farm's longtime neighbor, came by to check on things after the fire. As she watched Isabella coordinating the workers and distributing supplies, she couldn't hide her smile. "Isabella dear, I never thought I'd see you so involved," Ruth said, taking her hands warmly. Isabella smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Honestly, Ruth, I've surprised even myself. I never thought I'd feel so at home here." Ruth nodded approvingly. "You know, Jacob is proud of you. I don't think this farm has ever had someone so dedicated to its future." Ruth's words stayed with Isabella. For so long, she had considered herself an outsider, someone who would pass through Jacob's life without leaving a trace. But now that land, those people, they had become a part of her. The farm no longer felt like a temporary refuge, it was starting to feel like home. As Isabella adapted more to her new life, news of her transformation reached New York. Her father, William, had heard about the fire. Though he kept his concerns hidden, he couldn't help but worry about his daughter. Yet his pride and his focus on preserving the family legacy kept him from getting directly involved. Then one day, Isabella's phone rang unexpectedly. She answered and immediately recognized the commanding tone on the other end. "Isabella," her father's voice echoed, as stern as ever. "I heard about the fire," he said bluntly. "I hope it was enough to open your eyes and bring you back to the city." Isabella inhaled deeply. a mix of anger and sadness flooding her chest. "Dad, the fire only made me more certain about wanting to stay here. We're rebuilding, and I want to be part of that." William hesitated before responding, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Isabella, you have a whole life waiting for you in New York, with opportunities you'll never find in this place. Are you really willing to give all of that up?" "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice firm with conviction. "Here, I've found something I never had in New York. I'm helping to build something real, and that means more to me than any gala or bank account ever could." The silence stretched on, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was colder. "If that's what you want, then you're on your own. Don't expect any support from me." "I won't," Isabella said, her voice unwavering. She hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time, she was free to live her life without her father's expectations. The call had been a final break, but it also marked the start of a new chapter. With the help of the community and the farm workers, the barn was rebuilt. But it wasn't just a physical structure, it stood as a testament to Isabella and Jacob's strength, to the bond they had built and the choices they had made. Isabella was no longer an outsider, she had become part of the farm's foundation, and everyone there saw her as someone who truly cared. That night, as they celebrated the new barn's completion, Jacob gathered everyone who had helped. Isabella stood beside him, taking in the lights, the laughter, and the soft music playing in the background. She was overwhelmed with emotion. Jacob turned to her with a smile. "It seems that, in the end, this farm gained more than just a new barn," he said. She laughed softly, touching his arm. "I think so. I gained a home, a purpose, and you." His gaze grew intense, his eyes shining in a way she hadn't seen before. "And I gained someone I never expected to find, someone who has brought new meaning to my life." Under the starry sky, surrounded by the warmth and simplicity of the people who had become her community, Isabella felt complete. She had found her true self, something she never thought possible. Months passed since Isabella had made the choice to stay on the farm and rebuild her life with Jacob. Each day, she felt more fulfilled by her work, the support of the community, and the deepening love between her and Jacob. The farm thrived, and their relationship, once filled with resistance and conflict, blossomed into a profound partnership and affection. Isabella had finally found peace and purpose in the simplicity of the life she had chosen. One day, while Isabella was helping Jacob organize the new barn, a familiar car appeared down the dirt road. She froze, instantly recognizing it. It was her father, William. A rush of surprise and apprehension swept over her. It had been months since they last saw each other, and their last conversation had made their positions clear. But now he was here. She had no idea what to expect. William stepped out of the car, impeccably dressed as always, but this time his expression was softer, almost hesitant. Without his usual sternness, he seemed out of place, a powerful man in an environment that wasn't his own. "Dad," Isabella said, walking toward him, her voice uncertain. "Isabella," he replied gently, his tone softer than she remembered. "I wanted to talk to you, daughter." He paused, as though searching for the right words. "Could we go somewhere quieter?" Understanding the importance of this moment between father and daughter, Jacob nodded respectfully and returned to his work, leaving them alone. Isabella led her father to the porch, where they sat in an uncomfortable silence. William took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to continue. "Isabella, I know our last conversation was difficult," he began. "I spent a lot of time thinking about what you said. I always thought I knew what was best for you, but now I see that maybe I didn't understand what truly makes you happy." Isabella looked at him surprised. Seeing her father there, willing to let go of his rigidity, was something she had never imagined. "Dad, I know you've always wanted the best for me, but I've really found my place here," she said. "I never imagined life on the farm would give me so much, but it has." William nodded, his expression showing genuine acceptance. It's hard for a father to accept that his daughter has found happiness in a place so different from what I dreamed for her. "But if this is what makes you happy, then I want you to know I'm here for you." He glanced around, taking in the simple surroundings, and continued, "I want to support your choice, Isabella, and if you're okay with it, I'd like to be more present in your life." She smiled, touched by his words. "That means a lot to me, Dad. I've missed you." They hugged, and that gesture seemed to seal something they both needed. For the first time, William accepted his daughter's choices without reservations, and Isabella felt that her happiness was finally understood by him. After that meeting, William began visiting the farm more often, integrating with Isabella's friends and getting to know Jacob better. The respect and acceptance he developed for both of them only grew as he saw the genuine love that united the couple. During one of these visits, William suggested something that made Isabella and Jacob exchange surprised looks. "Isabella, Jacob," he said with a subtle smile, "have you ever thought about having a new wedding ceremony? Something that truly represents the life you've chosen together." Jacob looked at Isabella and she smiled, surprised. Their first wedding had been against her will, done under her father's pressure, marked by the resistance she had felt. But now, everything was different. She looked at Jacob and, seeing the enthusiastic sparkle in his eyes, realized that this idea made perfect sense. "Yes, I'd love to renew our vows," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. This time, with both of us agreeing. So the preparations for their second wedding began. Isabella wanted a simple ceremony that reflected the genuine love and meaning of the life they had built together. Ruth, the caring neighbor, helped with decorations, while Isabella and Jacob's friends volunteered to organize the food, prepare the flowers, and set up the surroundings. Everyone was involved, and the farm took on a celebratory atmosphere. The wedding day arrived, and the farm looked stunning under a blue sky and a gentle breeze. The altar was set up among the trees, decorated with wildflowers and light fabric swaying in the wind. Isabella wore a simple white linen dress that highlighted her natural beauty and reflected her transformed essence. With William by her side, walking her down the aisle, Isabella felt a peace she had never experienced before. Walking beside her father in this ceremony was much more than a ritual. It was the confirmation that both father and daughter had accepted the journey she had chosen. William, now a proud father, looked at his daughter with admiration and affection, finally understanding the value of true happiness. Jacob stood at the altar, his face glowing with love and joy as he saw her approaching. He took a deep breath. This time, it was a wedding of intertwined hearts, no impositions, no doubts, just the certainty that they were together because they wanted to be and because they belonged to each other. William handed Isabella's hand to Jacob with an emotional smile, then stepped aside, leaving them to exchange their vows. The air around them seemed to hold its breath, filled with respect and reverence, as if nature and the entire community were blessing their union. Isabella looked into Jacob's eyes, and with a voice filled with emotion said, "Jacob, the first time we said yes, I was a confused person and never imagined I'd end up finding my true home here. You showed me a new world, and now I'm here by free and complete choice, ready to share this life with you." Jacob held her hands firmly and responded, his eyes shining with love, "Isabella, you transformed my life in a way I never imagined. I promise to support you, love you, and share this farm and all that we are with you as my wife and partner." They smiled at each other and, under the applause and cheers of friends and family, shared a passionate kiss. It was the beginning of a new phase for both of them, a celebration of the journey that had brought them together. After the ceremony, the celebration spread across the farm. Tables were set up under the trees, and the homemade food prepared by friends brought a familiar, welcoming atmosphere. William mingled with the other guests, now at ease, smiling as he saw his daughter and son-in-law's joy. He had genuinely become part of that community and now understood that Isabella's happiness was greater than any legacy. When night fell, the dancing began. Isabella and Jacob danced together under the lights hanging from the trees, their smiles revealing the satisfaction of finally finding their place in the world, side by side. While her friends sang and danced around her, Isabella knew this was her life now, the farm, her friends, Jacob, and even the warm presence of her father. She felt like she had found the life she had always been searching for, and as she looked at Jacob, she knew this was only the beginning. What did you think of Isabella and Jacob's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, what would you rate this story? If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next video.